Hi everyone, my name is Brian, and this summer I had the opportunity of working in the Green Lakes Valley studying macroinvertebrate communities. So the inspiration for my research actually came from Dan Preston over at CSU. What Dan did was he studied the environmental impact of climate change and how it was affecting the ice-off dates of the lakes in the Green Lakes Valley. What he found was that on average, the ice-off dates were shifting 7 days earlier. More specifically, there was a difference based on elevation of these lakes, where Green Lakes 4 and 5, for example, had an ice-off date in July, whereas lower elevation ones like 2 and 3 were seeing an ice-off date in June. So what I wanted to ask is, what effects these ice-off dates had on the macroinvertebrates and their development as a community? So this is the map of the Green Lakes Valley, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, it is in the Indian Peaks Wilderness, which is out in Nederland, and actually this is the ridge where Lex was doing her research, so I'm like right below that. So what I wanted to do is set up 4 sample sites that kind of followed this elevation gradient. So we did 2 sample sites in the stream connecting 4 and 5, and then we did another 2 in the streams connecting 2 and 3, and there is a huge elevational drop off between 4 and 3, so that kind of helps mimic this elevational difference. So what we did at each 4 of the sample sites is first we kind of did a characterization of the habitat. What we did is we took down notes on the riparian and the substrate. Riparian is the vegetation along the stream bank, so we took note if it was grassy, if there was a presence of shrubs. For example, this site had a rock wall, so we took note of that. Also, with the substrate, we wanted to know what was going on there. We took note whether it was silty, whether it was rocky, if there was any kind of leaf litter or woody debris. And at each of these sites, we started off with a macroinvertebrate sample. For those of you unfamiliar with macroinvertebrates, it's kind of a broad term, but we specifically were looking at benthic macroinvertebrates, which are aquatic insects in their larval state that tend to live in the bottom of the water column in the substrate. So we use basic kick net procedures to do this, where you place a kick net flush with the bottom of the stream, and then in a square plot in front of the net, you disturb the substrate, pick up rocks, rub them together to get any of those macroinvertebrates loose. What we did next is we set up a 25-meter transect going downstream. And what we did is at 5-meter intervals, we took basic water chemistry data using a YSI probe. And what this does is it takes readings of temperature, nitrate, dissolved oxygen, total dissolved solids, pH level, things like that. And then we also took water samples at 5, 15, and 25-meter intervals that we later processed for chlorophyll A concentration. And why we did that is because chlorophyll A gives us an indication of the primary production in that area, and macroinvertebrates, of course, feed on the primary producers, so that kind of gives us an idea of what they can sustain. And then lastly, we did the macroinvertebrates because they have a long history and ecology of being used as biological indicators of the stream health. So what we found was we actually did 2 different samples of chlorophyll A concentration, and what we found was that at the stream connecting 2 and 3, it had already plateaued because of that June ice-off. But with the higher elevation one connecting 4 and 5, it was still producing more and more chlorophyll. There was a huge concentration shift there because of the July ice-off, and it had just happened. And we also saw a correlation between the chlorophyll A concentrations and the taxonomic richness at the different macroinvertebrate samples. We also saw that there was a jump in the taxonomic richness at the last site above GL2. And so what were the macroinvertebrates that we found, or as Xavier likes to call them, critters? So mostly, I'm just gonna stick to the common names so it's easier to understand, but we found a whole lot of different orders. We found crane flies, daggerflies, stoneflies, caddisfly, midgefly, and mayflies. The stoneflies, we actually found a very dense community above Green Lake 2 at that inlet, which future work would be interesting to find why that was so condensed in that particular spot. And with the caddisfly, that kind of ties back to why we were characterizing the substrate, because as you can see in this picture, this guy's got a little rocky case. The caddisfly will actually leave a case based on what substrate they have available. So in the Green Lakes Valley, they're typically with a rocky case, where other parts of the US you might find like a more like woody debris case. So we were able to establish that there was a trend along this gradient as you go downstream in lower elevation, where we found that the higher temperatures and the higher chlorophyll A concentrations were able to support a much more dense and diverse macroinvertebrate community. Given more time, it would have been interesting to do a sample in later August, kind of like an end season one, to see if that stream connecting 4 and 5 would eventually catch up to the levels that we saw in stream connecting 2 and 3, or if it maybe plateaued at like a lower level. Also, given the time, it would have been interesting to establish if there was any connection with the development of riparian at these streams with the snowmelt as like grass grew in, and if it played any role on the development of these macroinvertebrate communities. But unfortunately, there were major time constraints, so we weren't able to establish that. I just kind of want to thank my mentors, Sammy and Kurt, for all their help on the project. And I also want to thank Dana and Alicia for all their help. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd love to answer them.